Episode 17, John Kiely.
Welcome to the Oxidative Potential Podcast, where we discuss all things sports science and performance. I'm your host, Matthew DeRoche, and with me is my fellow co-host, Phil Batterson. Enjoy. Good day, folks. On today's episode, we have John Kiely. This is a conversation that I was really looking forward to, and it didn't disappoint. John is one of those people in the field that I look up to and have looked up to for a very long time. Back when I had initially read his work on training periodization, would have been in my teens almost maybe, it really clicked with me and kind of continue to push me in a really good direction, I think. Now, today we don't talk really much about periodization. We talk about coordination and just sport in general, its implications. Also, what are some possible ways to, try and move the needle on this? And is it something that should be, a little bit more in the forefront when we're considering organizing training for athletes, especially coming off of injury, but even just in general in sport. Now, John is a very deep thinker, and that's why just talking about anything is absolutely fascinating, because he really does try and get to the root of what it is that you're talking about. And so I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. I'm really looking forward to having John back on the podcast again, because we really just scratched the surface, especially when we're just even talking about coordination. But there's so much more that I'd love to discuss with John. Whether that's some of the new stuff in the field surrounding genetics. It's just endless. So if you want to follow John, I'll leave links to him in the show notes. I'll also leave some links to some of his papers as well. And so hope you guys enjoy this conversation, and we'll catch you later. Okay, John, we were just having a little discussion there about sports that we both kind of cut our teeth at coming up. And, we both kind of stopped on the point of, coordination was a probably not well explored area for that sport in specific, but also many other sports at that time when people are coming up. Up until now, I haven't heard a ton about coordination. These last few years, I'm starting to hear a little bit more on the topic, whether it's in relation to injury, relation to gait, biomechanical analysis, these things. But essentially where I came to it from was when I was competing in sport, when I was a high school athlete, I'd come across these guys called the Marinovich brothers. And they're kind of well known in the U.S., but they're fairly controversial, right? Because they use techniques that might not be well supported by the literature here in North America. But I know some of the people that they've kind of grafted their system around were either translating Russian literature or Russian scientists themselves that they had translated for them. So they came around the system of building up the tissue capacity, like you call it, for their athletes, but also they were trying to attack this coordination problem. So they would challenge the athletes through different means of whether it's balance discs or Swiss balls and having the hips rotate on Swiss balls, or many different exercises that they've created or, kind of stolen from the Eastern Bloc. But whenever I started really breaking down their system and some of the concepts that they were trying to push forward, I realized, wow, I think there is a lot to do with coordination here. And I think coordination does hold a key, regardless if these guys are on the right track. But I think a lot of people are missing the importance of coordination. So into modern day, I think you're one of the people that have come out here and really stressed the importance of educating individuals on coordination so we can further approach how do we train this thing that hasn't been properly explored. So if you want to kind of take us off from there.
Well, first of all, if we go back, I don't know, maybe 20 years or thereabouts,
Mhm.
there wasn't really any philosophy of coordination within most of the major sports. The sport that everyone looked to for guidance was track and field, because fantastic runners, they're obviously well coordinated. So what they do in training is obviously promoting that coordination.
Mhm.
But really, they were just fantastic runners in the sense that there wasn't a when I looked, I guess there wasn't really a formalized way of teaching coordination. There was lots of what in this side of the world they would just call athletic drills,
Mhm.
which were traditionally like used in warm up. And they were the type of drills where this is the shape you need to hit. You need to look like this.
Mhm.
And these would be things that everyone would be familiar with, like a slow high knees walk or march, or A skips, B skips, that kind of thing. And there was a number of programs put together by some really, really good and high profile coaches at the time, mostly US based. Tom Tellis, Barry Lewis's coach, springs to mind. But it was pretty much a collection of these standardized movements with the built on assumption that if you do this, it will enhance your coordination. And it may well be for some people, it did a bit, but the way I think of coordination, it's much more of it's obviously a more dynamic process than just hit these shapes. Coordination is really your body's ability to solve problems. Now, in an athletic context, those problems might be very similar. So if I'm a marathon runner and I have whatever 40,000 ground contacts, I'm going to solve each problem in broadly the same way. No two will ever be solved exactly the same way in terms of same point of contact, same knee position relating, in comparison to posture, in comparison to ankle. Everything will always vary slightly differently.
Mhm.
And that's an inherent feature of effective coordination. Your body, your brain knows how to disperse load effectively under normal conditions. So there's coordination when you're doing the exact same thing, or what looks like the exact same thing over and over again. You're a marathon runner, you're an ultra runner, you're a Tour de France cyclist. And then there's, I guess, when we talk about coordination, we tend to think about the leading examples. Who are the people that are really well coordinated? Well, maybe it's a basketball player, maybe it's a boxer, somebody who have to very rapidly adjust, respond to visual cues, audio cues, all types of sensory input, and respond really nearly reflexively, very dynamically to execute a complex solution to a complex problem. So to me, kind of coordination is the same type of thing. It's basically your brain's ability to put the body in the position, at the speeds, at the relative positions that is going to what? It's going to be relatively efficient, but it won't be the most efficient. It's going to be relatively safe, but it won't be the absolute safest. It's going to maybe reduce discomfort, but maybe it won't reduce that optimally. So it's you could call it a kludge. There's a word of kludge. There was a book by Gary Marcos in 2008, and a kludge is kind of a set of workarounds to realize an objective. And that's the way I think of coordination. It doesn't do anything perfectly. It's the best set of negotiated solutions that solve a number of problems for brain and body. So the key ones would be, okay, pain. Well, right, I don't want it to be uncomfortable. So that's reduced. Energy cost, okay, that's reduced. Internal muscular loads, that's reducing, or the amount of activity you need in a muscle. The neural demand, in other words, do I have to think very hard about my movement? Is there a way I can think about this movement a bit less? And then that's what I'll do. There's balances in there. There's all types of criteria layered upon this, all types of demands, impositions, constraints, all shouting, you have to satisfy me, you have to satisfy me. And that's what coordination does. It satisfies all the key ones to an acceptable level. Mm-hmm. And the better you are at coordinating, then the more appropriately, effectively, efficiently you solve all those different demands. Mm-hmm. So if we take that as just a general way of thinking about coordination, I guess what we're talking about is coordination is referred to by other names elsewhere, with motor control obviously being the big one. And there's any amount of research, reams and reams of research on motor control, and there has been for 80 years or more. I like the word coordination. I think it comes without, you say motor control, and there's a lot of preconceptions that kind of avalanche on top of you, and it's hard to think straight about it because, this theory of motor control, this theory of motor control. And it's before you have a conversation about it, you nearly have to justify why you're picking this theory over that theory, and the conversation becomes totally academic, and you never get to talk about, okay, well, what can you actually do about it? And that's where I come in. That's what I was interested in, is, okay, what I was seeing as someone who was working with professional athletes, who was working with a lot of injuries, what I could see was people were changing. Post-injury, people were changing. And this was, when I say I could see it, I thought I could see it. Maybe sometimes I could, maybe sometimes I imagined it. The perception was there from me as the viewer, but from the athlete as well. Something's different. I'm feeling different. I don't think I can quite do this. So even when people were being returned from injury, post their, if there was a medical intervention, post their official rehab, there was always this legacy of change in them. That's what I was really interested in. Is how can we scrub clean that legacy? Yeah. So that's where I come into coordination.
That's it's something that's been on the top of my mind, actually, what you just spoke about in that last portion, because right now I'm in the midst of, consulting with surgeons, trying to get a surgery going here. And I'm not so, like, it is annoying because, you're waiting, and, the degradation of the tissues of, that they're going to be repairing. It's going to essentially create a higher risk in the long term for the outcome. But the big thing I'm worried about is the more time I'm spending with these tissues in a stuck position, not having any sensory input come in, not being loaded. And I know the longer I wait, the harder it's going to be to regain the level of coordination that I previously had, right? I'm not so worried about, I am worried about the health of the tendon, but I'm more so worried about, am I going to, be stuck in chronic pain for several years because, the sensory input is just not where it needs to be to find the solution to manage just locomotion or whatever it is. Because I know this is a big area of research right now, and tendon pathologies is, the influence of the motor cortex, and using various methods to try and engage that in different ways to help with these rehab processes. But it is something that it's funny, but I don't think a lot of people think about that as, it's just not something that's brought up much. It's just, let's armor up that injury and get you back into the exposure. But yeah, it's interesting too that the other thing you were talking about is finding these movement solutions. There was a climbing coach from Germany that I spent many years reading up on. His name is Udo. I can't remember his last name, but essentially he had a very unique approach to training his boulderers and climbers. They would go out and create, at the beginning of every practice, they would go out and create these physical problems for the athletes to solve, whether it was, doing various movements down a flight of stairs in various positions, or doing different things with ropes and different apparatuses that the athletes have never seen before. And this brought to mind of like, this is what true physical intelligence is. This is what, if we were to talk about physical IQ, this is how you would enhance that. Because whenever I see someone that's a good athlete, a lot of the times it's not just that they can perform a movement in a coordinated fashion. It's that they can solve a problem that they've never seen before through a large amount of prior experience that they've been exposed to, and kind of create this unique solution to the problem. And I've seen that a lot in climbing. It was very exposed to me. The first time I ever went bouldering, I was like, locking onto holds that I felt were impossible to hold on to. I was like, there's no way I can physically do this. And people, no, you can do this. This is well within your capability. And you just start to change your positions, and you spend hours at changing your positions. And then you're moving through these movements like they're a warm up, almost like a warm up hold. And, several hours ago, this was the hardest thing for in your life to hold on to. You could no possibly way, complete this. But yeah, it's just, I think there's whenever you start thinking about coordination and you approach learning new sports, or engaging in your primary sport with that in mind, I think your perception starts to change a lot about, what is needed to enhance. So let's talk about what are the main components of coordination when we're talking about just breaking it down from a general perspective. What are the things that are inherent in coordination that are kind of a piece of the puzzle? I've heard you talk about these before, like tissue capacity and these things. What are the things that we have to take in consideration of this process of coordinating movement?
Well, I guess there's a number of ways you can look at it, and you mentioned some interesting words there. Perception. The perception changes. That's a really important word for coordination, because for every single aspect of athletic preparation and sports performance. Now, for as a simple example, if you take something like placebo effects, what are placebo effects? Okay, so we all know, well, it's a dummy pill, or it's a sham intervention. But you can get a placebo effect if somebody tells you this is a placebo. Okay, this is a sugar pill. Yeah. But placebos have been shown to work in all of these cases here. Look, there's the evidence. You take the placebo, and it can drastically reduce, for example, the pain caused by chronic irritable bowel syndrome. So, perception is a really, really important thing. I would say, actually, it's one of the most important things. One of the things we do least well as trainers, coaches, rehabbers, etc., is influencing, positively orienting somebody's perceptions. If I have a perception that, well, every time I do that, I get pain in my knee, well, maybe that's the first thing we need to look at before we get you into the gym and give you a load of different exercises. We need to look at what are your beliefs around that perception. Well, I think my knee, and then you'll always hear, well, wear and tear and an old injury,
Yeah.
yada, yada, yada. So I think there's things we can do to change our perception. Now, how does this feed into coordination? Coordination is really, it's obviously something to do with your physical capability, okay, your, tissue capacity,
Mhm.
but more than that, it's your overall perception of how you can solve a problem. So, for example, if I'm playing a soccer match or something like that, and I see a gap, first thing that happens is not that I go for the gap. It's like a little argument in my head. Am I going to make that gap? Do I have the ability to make that gap? The speed, the acceleration. When I slam my foot down there to change direction, will I be able to control the load at this pace or not? So there's all these unconscious calculations that are going on. Now, your higher brain might not know anything about those. The only thing it will know is, oh shit, I'm not going to make that. You just get all these influences will convince it like that. No, I'm not going to make that, and you pull out of it. Or, yeah, I can do that. I'm going to nail that.
Yeah.
So there is physical capacities, of which tissue capacity is one. Your brain's perception of how well it can control your body in movement under complexity, that's an influence. But ultimately, your brain won't let you do something that is going to be damaging to you, or it won't make it easy for you to do. You might be able to force it, but there, in a moment, in a sporting context, if I perceive that's going to hurt, or oh no, I can't do that, it's not going to happen, regardless of whether your physical ability is capable of it or not.
Yeah.
Now, that's not something we often think about in terms of movement or movement conditioning or athletic training, but we are completely limited by our perceptions before we're limited by our physical capacities or our neural control or our kind of reflex efficiency or any of those things. First and foremost is, what do I deep down, at a core level, what do I believe I can do? And it's the athlete's problem as well. They don't believe, or they think every time they do this, they'll have pain. Then the first protocol is to, okay, well, how can I change that belief? Or how can I reason that belief out? Or how can I show to them through some intelligent exercise design or exercise progression that, well, actually, you're not limited there. You're better than you thought you are now able to do that thing. Mm-hmm. And that's like, for me at least, that's a first protocol. It's, okay, I need to establish what they actually believe, what their deepest beliefs around this problem are, whether that problem is a specific movement one or a specific movement in pain one. Now, I don't know if I slid off your question there or off a tangent.
No, I think that's very enlightening, because one of the first times I've come across exactly what you're explaining there is when, I was younger and we were all going bridge jumping, into the water below. And we were trying to do various things at the bridge. But one of the things I noticed is, when we were trying to jump off as far as possible, the inhibition when you are at a level of height that you could possibly seriously injure yourself, the dampening of output, right? The ability to jump off as far as you possibly could was so inhibited just because your brain is telling you, hey, there's a high chance you are going to maim yourself or, get yourself injured here. So we are not going to let you to do this activity. Now here, we've all heard this with regards to, jumping, and the brain won't let us, engage in a process of going up so high that we can't safely land on 1 feet or 2 feet. But I think it's not really a well thought out process for a lot of people when they're trying to train some of these these properties. And also it's just not widely talked about, like we said. And I think that was a good explanation of, why that is a very important starting point. And starting point because it's at the very core of everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, theoretically, you could do the physical training.
Yeah.
You could be prescribed the, let's call it, the best
Yeah.
type of training for you in your sport.
Yeah.
But if you don't perceive that that is going to work for you, if you do not believe in that, if you don't have confidence that that is going to move you forward,
Mm-hmm.
then you were dampening down the adaptive effects and at multiple scales.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to get the confidence you should from performing training. Like a fundamental aspect of training is, I did the training, I am now better. It's the
Mm-hmm.
belief. You're not going to get that. But then even at a more kind of mundane nuts and bolts level, it's going to increase things like anxiety. I don't believe in this training. Why is coach making me do this training? I don't like it. It feels uncomfortable. I'm wasting my time. If you would be set by all those beliefs and doubts and anxieties, that is just taking percentage points off your adaptive potential constantly. Now, the opposite way around, you could have a very mundane, common garden training program,
Mm-hmm.
but you really buy in and you enjoy it and you believe in it and you engage in it and you're wholehearted and you go to bed happy thinking another day, this tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
and you will amplify those training benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So, so often, at least in my world, with it's all kind of fitness, rehab, strength and conditioning type things that consume my mind. We all have these theories and we all have these favorite go-tos. That's my favorite exercise. That's the best training session for this. We all have those type of things. And conventionally, I've never seen it in a book, for example, or I've never heard it at a conference. Post protocol is, what does the athlete believe?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing something that you think is great, but it runs contrary to the athlete's belief, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You could get gains for just having a conversation.
Yeah.
Finding out what the athlete thinks or similar. Anyway, that's me kind of going off on a pet peeve there. It's just beliefs are important, predictions are important. Our brain, and I'm going to tie this back to coordination because I know we've gone off that a little bit. If I want to move through a complex kind of series of challenges, like if I'm an American footballer or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and I have the ball and I'm looking at the pitch in front of me, it is all prediction based.
Mm-hmm.
My brain looks and predicts and thinks, I'm going to get hammered, or no, I can get through this.
Mm-hmm.
It's prediction. And then that prediction is held up against your deeply embedded beliefs about you, and there's all kinds of things that factor into that, a lifetime experience, what's happened to you in previous exposures of similar types. And out of that comes, we're talking about coordination. Here's my movement plan. Do I believe I can execute that plan? Yes, no, okay, I need to dial it down. Or, oh, there's the pain in my knee. Or, you find something goes wrong. Or, yeah, maybe a cleaner way of saying it is the thing that comes first, if you want to successfully execute a coordinated movement, is you have to have belief that you can execute it.
Mm-hmm.
That belief shouldn't be rooted in baseless optimism.
Mm-hmm.
It should be a deeply embedded belief because you've solved similar problems successfully in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like one of the pillars of self-efficacy and sports psychology, right? The previous experience with what you're about to engage in. But it is, that in itself, what we, the belief and buy-in, I'd love to have a chat on that someday, because it is it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about when I was younger. Obviously it started off the point of placebo effect, and I was like, well, with sham knee surgeries for the meniscus and whatever else, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And it just kind of flew off from there, and trying to understand, like, okay, what about, training adaptations? What about mind muscle connection? All these different things that I was trying to wrap my head around. But one thing that does come up when you say that is, when we're talking about, because this is something that I've spent a long time thinking. I think it's Bill Harrison was the guy that I first came across. He's passed away now, but his son still kind of runs his operation where they do vision training, right? And this is something that I haven't seen a lot of research in the sports performance realm, but I have a couple textbooks on it. Joan Vickers is another lady. She's very, very well known in the vision space, but just being able to visually assess the situation that an athlete's in accurately is another step of that sensory puzzle of, first, if I'm gonna think this is possible, I have to be in a position where I'm accurately sensing, whether it's with kinesthetic, like with the body, and visually too, that I'm in the right place at the right time, like where I'm at in space. And I think that's another thing that's like another tangent, like with athletes that have had concussions, that I don't think is taking into big consideration. Is it's starting to get some more light now, but the rehabilitation of the visual processes, right? And I think whenever I've tested people's vision, there's some just very basic, like divergence, convergence, binocularity. A lot of these things, whether the person has had a concussion or not, are very underdeveloped, I would say. And I think that is with the sensory of trying to understand, is this possible or not? I think that's a big piece of the puzzle too. And a lot of people want to go out there and knock it because, oh, there hasn't been, 1,200 review papers on this subject of showing clear performance gains. But the problem lies with, is the athlete have a deficiency in vision? Has the athlete had, like, there's so many factors that are hard to kind of tease out within that, whether or not it's going to help an athlete, just like respiratory training, right? Like, whether the athlete can breathe 70% of his FEV1 during high intensity is, that's going to dictate whether they can gain from this, probably. But anyways, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. But yeah, I do think that just the belief in itself is such a powerful thing. And one of the things I say with, clinical diagnostic testing is, I'm trying to increase buy-in. And people kind of say it's like, oh, sleazy, you're trying to make money. I'm not making money. I'll never pay back the equipment that I purchased. It's realistically, though, giving something the athlete to show objectively, like, hey, this is a reality that we're seeing. And it is very sensitive to the inputs that we give you, right? If we give you an input of this type of stimulus, we will most likely see this, and it creates buy-in because the athlete is connected to the physiological changes on a deeper level than just heart rate or pace. They're actually buying in deeper to the training because they're seeing these metrics change over these acute periods of time. And I think that's such an important, whatever way that people want to engage in the process of getting buy-in and belief. I'm a big stakeholder in that. I think it's so important. I think it's hugely important.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, it's an essential first thing to put in place. It's the foundation,
Yeah.
And I've worked with a lot of coaches who would be considered famous coaches, and they've had big success,
Mm-hmm.
as in whatever international success or Olympic gold medals, silver medals. Um, and I was always looking at what are the common points between these folks. And with some of them, they were like, personalities were totally opposite. It's like I could not, for years, I could not find the commonality. I just wanted to know. Some of them were good technical coaches. Some of them didn't really have a very strong technical model, or it was completely different to everybody else's, at least. Some of them had good knowledge about, other aspects of training or training theory or strength training theory, but there wasn't, it seemed that they were all different. Even these coaches, the only thing they had in common was the coach had been very elite level and they had success. But then, a couple of years go by, you think a little deeper about it. What all these coaches did have, at least from my observation, was the athletes rode in behind them. The athletes got on board.
Yeah.
Now, some of that was due to the personality. The personality didn't have to be exuberant or a comedian or anything like that.
Yeah.
But the athlete had to trust that personality and trust that that the coach had their back.
Yeah.
And often, like all coaches, you don't work for everyone. But so, all of these folks, you could argue all day about their technical expertise. They obviously had a certain level, but that to me was the big seller. And I've seen plenty of coaches on the other end, I'm sure you have too, technically, academically, really, really good, really up to speed with all the, new things, tools, etc. But they couldn't get athletes to trust or have faith or go, I don't know if I'm going to trust the next 4 years of the next Olympic cycle with you. I'm not prepared to commit to that because you don't fill me with confidence.
Yeah. That's it's such and the other part of that too is, the more buy-in that you get with an athlete, a lot of the times, the more attentive the athlete will be, but it can come back to bite some of those coaches. One thing I notice is a lot of coaches don't like being held accountable, right? I think it's I can see it. I know it when I see it. When I see a coach that, kind of dismisses data, not all coaches, but they dismiss any form of accountability in a lot of times, because sometimes they know that the methods and the approach that they're employing is leaving a lot of the athletes out to dry, but they feel like this is just kind of the best approach. No, it's the only, I have a weight room of 25 kids or I have a team. I can't get everyone to, and so they kind of push away from that. And, they feel like if they take on this, approach of accountability, that it will somehow enlighten the athlete to maybe some of the drawbacks. But I mean, that's an important thing for the athlete to understand, because I mean, if you're trying to do things to the best of your ability and just be a good human being and giving the athlete what they deserve and understanding, are you getting better? Or are you not getting better? Right. And
I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I think where you started off there, I totally agree with, which was around accountability and not holding ourselves accountable.
Yeah.
And again, that's not specific to coaches, obviously, that's human beings in general, we don't tend to do that very well. But I think, it's something that I definitely take steps to try and do. I didn't always, but I do now, and it's just, bitter experience, mistakes, and anything. It's so easy to excuse yourself. So the year that the team did well or the athlete did well, this is what I did. The year they did badly, that's what they did, or what somebody else did. And it's like, it's a nearly subconscious reflex.
Yeah.
You have to kind of, no, hang on a second.
Yeah.
And dial this back. I was part of the team, because it's easy to farm out your errors to
Yeah.
other people. But if we want to get better, then we need to kind of forensically go through. How could have stopped that? Why didn't I raise my hand? Or I shouldn't have done that without consulting or without, checking or whatever it might be. So I think that really is important in terms of making us better practitioners. I think we have to submit our kind of deepest emotions and fears to forensic dissection.
Yeah.
Why did I do that? For me, what it's come down to is just trying to establish at the start of, let's say it's a tournament, for example. What are my objectives as a practitioner? Okay, I need to be on point every day or 6 days a week in these different ways. I need to control my emotions, because if you go, especially if you're traveling and it's high pressure, the wheels come off people really quickly. Couple of weeks, everyone is friendly, and then things go pear-shaped. And if people start coming down injured, or you start losing games, then blame is getting thrown around everywhere. And you have to kind of nearly consciously decide at the outset, I'm not playing that game. I'm not doing that. I need to present a better version of me, a better version than I am anywhere else. This is the way I need to perform from the communications perspective, from a calmness perspective, from a kind of clearness perspective, all of those things. And it's nearly a conscious decision beforehand for me. I've made all these mistakes before, not doing them this campaign. And then I stick a review at the back end of it. Okay, how did I hold up to these standards I set myself at the start? And then what can I learn from that? And if I'd started doing that 20 years ago, I'd be much better now than I am. But it took me 15 years to realize, well, this is what you actually have to do to be a better practitioner.
That was a very powerful process that you described there. I swear I just talked about this on another podcast, which was something that I learned way too late in my life, which was, I learned it from a climbing guide, where he would essentially, take out his notebook every day and write down, when did I put my client in the most amount of danger today? What did I fail to understand on a theoretical level that also created some level of risk that was unacceptable? Every day with every client, he just continued to write down these things, and I kind of stole that and incorporated it into my training, because every time I would spar a roll with someone, whether they kind of were getting the upper hand or not, I would always say, how do you go about picking me apart and beating me? How did you go about, getting the advantage or getting the higher ground in that situation? And whenever, you start to let go of the ego, you realize how much growth can come from that. Like I won't get into that quote, but that is a very powerful, process, because we're all trying to get better. We're all, and inherently, the better we get at this process of dealing with, what the athlete needs, giving them that, the more results we're going to see, the better impact we're going to be making. So let's talk about a little bit about where you would move off of the process of belief, and is this possible? Where is the next place that you go to from there?
If we're talking about kind of training or retraining post-injury movement specifically, well, okay, so I think at some level we all realize that coordination is really important. To
Yeah.
me, it is the kind of the super capacity
Yeah.
that all the other capacities feed into. You cannot have good endurance
Mhm.
without movement efficiency, without coordination.
Mhm.
You can certainly be strong in an isometric test, but there's even some coordination in that. And certainly when you come into complex movements or even complex lifts,
Mhm.
it's all coordination is the super capacity. Coordination regulates everything else and pulls it together, orchestrates it. Coordination is your brain conducting this kind of multi-entity piece, the biological piece that is your body. So for me, coordination is everything essentially. Um, so how we train it? Well, we don't really have a good uh, historical framework in terms of how we train coordination.
Yeah.
Um, in one sense, everything we do trains coordination.
Yeah.
You can mess up your coordination by just don't sleep tonight. That will mess your coordination. Get stressed. That will mess your coordination. Bang your head off the wall a couple of times. That will mess with your coordination. So we can do a lot of things that will affect your coordination. Do the opposite of all of those. Get sleep, be rested, be calm, be confident, be appropriately motivated. All those things will enhance coordination. A little bit of stress, enhance coordination. In terms of training it, as I said, in years gone by, everyone looked to track and track and field had these movement drills, which were really rudimentary,
Yeah.
really do as I say.
Mhm.
You replicate how this person looks, and that will teach you to be a better mover. And obviously, that doesn't work very well or efficiently. Around 2005, Franz Bosch came out with his book, Biomechanics of Running. And I think Franz did certainly in track and field were a great service because it was the first attempt to really talk about coordination in a more multidimensional way than it had been talked about, which was it's not really talked about at all, it's just assumed. So I think Franz did a great job there, and he is a good designer of exercises. That was the first thing that attracted me to his work. He designs exercise as well. Okay, but things have moved on. We're 2022 now. How do we train coordination? And I think that so the first proviso is all movement trains coordination in some way.
Yeah.
Because you're moving, your brain is the same brain, it's the same body. If I was setting up a training program for someone who had been identified as, either they have a problem or they need to move better, or they've never done any type of coordination training before, what would I do? And I think what I would do is I would have a layered approach where, and again, the problem with coordination is it's multifaceted. It's about it's about you taking in sensory information from inside and outside. You comparing that to past experience, you comparing that to the problem at hand, and coming up with an emergent series of movements to solve that problem. Okay, so there's some contribution from the conscious mind, thinking I need to do that, or so it's making decisions, yes, no. There is multiple contributions from reflexes within your spinal reflexes. Some of those reflexes are complex. It's kind of if this in this condition, then do this.
Mm-hmm.
So they're complicated, and there's some very basic lower spinal reflexes which are just on-off switch.
Yeah.
Now, what your brain does is based on past experience, it goes, okay, well, I can rely on that reflex to kick in now.
Mm-hmm.
And it factors that into its prediction, and it factors it into its movements, its movement strategy. So if we were to take it that, and I'm just going to chunk it into basic levels here, what can I do to train it? Okay, well, there's something around communication and interpretation of sensory signals by the higher brain or by your motor cortex. How can we train that? Okay, well, one way of training it is to train it slowly. So slowly, so you can, you have time to digest and decipher and interpret what your body is doing in space and time. So this could be, it could be setting someone any type of movement problem, but asking them to execute it slowly. Now, there's a constant feed of feedback and feed forward information there. So especially in the presence of prior sensitization or injury, where that flow of information has been disrupted, this can help reboot that, if you like. So I would have something slow there. And I mean, I understand I'm just flying over this, so come back to me if you want to delve deeper. I think then there's something about, obviously we can't just do it slow. Okay, slow might reboot our communication between specific motor units and motor cortex, but I need to move fast. So there needs to be some fast type coordination challenge there. Certainly in all field sports, court sports, there's going to be impact. Okay, now I need some coordination challenges that are, based around impact or revolve around impact. So that could be, whatever it might be. Simple example, it could be low hurdles or coming off low boxes, things like that. Now, they mightn't sound like very demanding coordination challenges, but those type of rebound movements, they're all reflex dependent. One of the things that I won't say is known, but is suspected strongly, is that if you get sensitized, or maybe you've had a long, hard training career, okay, you've had 10 years, bangs and bruises, a lot of kind of abuse to your body through training and injury, the age will have come off some of those reflexes. But those reflexes are critically important. And we don't really have a training methodology for reflexes.
Yeah.
So how can we train reflexes? Okay, well, I think we can train them by basically doing what I'm suggesting, doing that slow movement stuff where there's a lot of slow stability, but also doing some of the fast stuff. So those really short loop reflexes, those very, very quick ones. Yeah. There has been some research done with international level athletes to show that post-injury, in this case it was ACLs, that their short loop reflexes had been dulled, but through some relatively straightforward bounce training, they could reboot, they could refine, they could bring them back up to initial levels of performance. Now, it doesn't matter if everything I'm saying here is wrong. Everything I'm saying here is a best guess.
Yeah.
But the key idea is we have this thing called coordination. We know how to generally train it. We don't really know how to specifically train it and reboot it. So the main point is I think we should have some type of system, some principled system that could be individual to everyone in their own beliefs, but we need to get at the major components of coordination, sometimes in isolation, always in a coherent movement context. So I don't know if that made any degree of sense. So, but please come back to me where it didn't.
No, it absolutely did. There's a few things that this really does kind of bring up in my mind is one, when you're talking about slow movements, I spent a long time trying to understand what Jay Schroeder was doing over at Evo Sport. I mean, okay, it's secretive, blah, 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 this and that. Everyone was kind of like, there was a buzz around it in the whole DB Hammer thing. But the more I got into it, I really did see a lot of value in some of those things, because inherently those processes that he was employing day after day, the same thing day after day after day, were gaining really good results. And I don't think it's a coincidence that like some of the best athletes find great benefit in the system that he uses, like Jonathan Taves, some of these guys, you know, super elite. And I think those guys know their body very well. And I think they understand when they're gaining benefit in a coordinated fashion or its strength and all these other things. I think there's something that they're obviously people are going to say that's controversial, but I don't know if you've gone out there and done any of his stuff out there. I think there is a benefit to that. But then another thing when you're talking about slow is like I remember reading about the Russian tennis club Spartak, I think it was called, where she would have her athletes go through these forehands and backhands for 5 minutes for one stroke. You know, same concept of what Schroeder was doing. And I understand the breakdown because we're not going to get into kinematic jerk and smoothness and all that stuff right today because it's a deep topic. But minimizing those by doing these movements slow is probably one of the best ways to like isolate, you know, those, because I don't think a lot of people realize how bad they are at some of the movements they do day by day until they do them slow. And then when they do them slow, they realize, oh, wow, there's a lot of neurological skipping, I would like to say. Is like, oh, I can't perform this. I'm going to, and you get these jerk, right? Kinematic jerk and these things to kind of compensate for the lack of coordination. But then finally, what this brings up is when you were talking about some of that research with the ACL stuff, it brings up some of Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher's research to mind, where he was using stochastic resonance. And someday I will shell out the money to find, you know, some way to incorporate this into my practice. I know there's more basic ways of doing it, but some of the results that I was reading from his research and some of the offhand stuff that I was reading that has, you know, no research to back it up, but some of the inherent results that they were getting with skiers and other athletes, it just made sense to me when you break down what that machine is actually doing. It's providing unexpected perturbations at a very, very high rate. The body has to find a way to deal with that. The same with the research that you were talking about there. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's the step off the box, right? With the perturbation midway, just or
Yeah.
close to the ground. I inherently think that is a very, very key portion to maintaining and also developing these fast reflexes. And some coaches focus, like these few coaches that I've kind of brought up, they really do focus on some of these things more than the other coaches. And I think it's no coincidence that they've found great success. It's like people want to talk crap about, you know, oh, it's none of it's supported and well, how is that going to help you? But if you've talked to any of the athletes that have trained under those systems, because I've went out there and done it and talked to those athletes, and I've myself incorporated a lot of those methods, and you can't deny there's something going on there. I just, if someone feels differently, I'd love to hear their experience with it because, yeah, I found nothing but great things. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is, I think it's really important. I think that instead of dismissing the things because they are unknown or unfounded, we should further try and investigate them. Because I don't hear anyone other than you talking about, you know, I'm not sure on this, but I'm at least going to try and figure out a way to systematize this and organize it that would make sense.
Yeah, well, so yes, and that's what I've tried to do. Now, I know what I'm trying to do is make sure that I don't leave any potential aspect or major aspect of coordination alone.
Yeah.
It's like, and now a lot of my thought is driven from the context I'm normally in. Is it's an injured athlete or it's an older athlete trying to squeeze out another season.
Yeah.
So you're looking for the extra little percentage points
Yeah.
here and there.
Yeah.
So in relation to the slow, you know, the very slow movement, I think, yeah, I'm not aware of any specific research in sporting context.
Yeah.
But if you go and you look at kind of the relevant neuroscience research, and I've referenced quite a lot of that in, that smoothness article you referenced, and there's been another couple. Yeah, I mean, it makes a sense. It's rooted in evidence. It hasn't been done in our world,
Yeah.
but it makes a degree of evidence. For me, what I would do is, I break it up into my categories of, okay, well, I can try some training intervention here.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe there isn't a conventional training intervention, so I need to create one. And then you try it with the athlete, and the athlete says, no, I don't know if that's doing anything for me. And you go, okay, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
We tear that up. But yeah, I have found, and now with the lead international players, this is that even though they were, well, maybe especially because they hadn't been exposed to slow, controlled movement before,
Mm-hmm.
they reported back, I feel I was getting faster.
Mm-hmm.
How could that be?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in my head, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's because that type of training is good and it enhances control.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe your threshold for driving positive adaptation was low because you'd never experimented with that type of training before.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's a placebo effect because I explained to you the rationale for doing it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we tried something to achieve an objective.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as you have metrics, the objectives seem to be achieved. So from a practical perspective, that's kind of job done in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been because of a belief or a confidence, or dropping anxiety about something, or it might be because, that training works.
Mm-hmm.
Again, all I can do is think about it deeply, make my best guess, deliver it present it in an honest way. This might work, this might not work. Here's why I think it might. Do it, have a test built in. When I say test, a test could be as simple as we try this for 2 weeks and then we debrief.
Yeah.
And if you're not bought in, that's okay. Nothing lost. We leave it as a failed experiment and we'll try something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you're doing it, because science doesn't have all the answers for us at the moment. And I'm saying that as a person who works in a university as an academic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, is the science leading the coaches or are coaches leading the science? And, sometimes it's a bit of both. In some areas, it's coaches seem to be ahead of the science. In others, the science is kind of pulling coaches over towards it. But there's no hard and fast answer. If there's not X amount of studies done, then you shouldn't experiment with something.
Yeah.
That doesn't really make sense, especially when you're coming into who has done randomized controlled trials on 4-year-old players with multiple hamstring injuries. And, when you have 4 weeks to get them ready for a major game, we don't have that type of information. So you have to, it's totally legitimate to freestyle it, essentially.
Yeah.
Once you're taking due diligence, once you're doing it honestly and openly with the head coach and with the player. In other words, you're saying, I'm making my best guess here, but I'm going to put a 0.6 probability that this will be successful, and a 0.3 that maybe the athlete will get injured. Are you prepared to accept those risks, or do I need to adjust? You think of it like that, you present it like that, and don't get me wrong, I spend a lot of my life writing stuff for academic publications, so I'm in no way dismissing that and turning it up. I'm just saying it takes you so far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Takes you so far.
Yeah.
But a lot of the problems you get in elite sport are very, very, very specific, and they need an answer now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a great way to put it, because I'm young and I lack maturity in some ways, and sometimes, like I was having a discussion with a Darian Barr the other day, and I got kind of riled up, and if the research right now can show me to take 10 athletes and make them world class sprinters, if the research has the answers for that, I'll be a devotee for the rest of my life. I will never leave my eyes from a piece of research, but it's just not there yet. So when people say, oh, the research doesn't support that, this guy has no factual basis to be doing that with his athletes or to be proposing that, well, it's just, I think it's an intellectual cop out, and people want to feel secure with that. And I'm not trying to tear it down, but I think if you're getting everything right with an athlete, there's probably, you're either measuring something incorrectly, and that's something I like to explain to people that I work with is like, hey, if I get everything right off the bat and I just throw something at and we get everything right, there's probably something wrong. You shouldn't be trusting me, because either I'm giving you false information, or you're just at such a low level of stimulus to adapt, like that, you're basically a beginner. That's the only two ways it is, because if you're actually gaining, you're probably going to have some points where there's the dip in performance or dip in progress, right? So yeah, well, I've taken up enough of your time. We've already had to reschedule this. So I'll kind of come into like, I'd love to do this again, because I feel like anything we just talked on could be a podcast in itself. Anything we just discussed could be a podcast in it. So I'll ask you a couple of questions that I asked for a final question. So I won't go through all of them, but one of them I'd be interested to hear is, what is a preconceived notion that you held, or a hypothesis that you held at a certain point of time that you learned a great deal from, and it turned out to be incorrect, right? It turned out to be incorrect, and you learned a great deal from that. What was the prior bias, or what was the prior understanding that led you into that? Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question. So I've met loads, but the one that springs to mind is, let's say, around maybe mid 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with a lot of elite power athletes, as in Olympians, world champions, that type, sprints, jumps. And a lot of these folks have kind of what you think of as just grumbly backs. That kind of low back is always grumbly.
Mm-hmm.
There's always somebody discomfort, somebody compromise around training. And at the time, I bought into the idea that, okay, when we're lifting heavy loads, you need to have your back in a precise shape and hold that shape consistently through the movement. And that made intuitive sense to me, I think, at the time, or at least the way it was explained to me or the way I read it. I thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And because we didn't, my perception at the time was, we didn't really know how to train the core very well. Do we train the core? Should we train the core? There wasn't really any coherent theory there. And I grabbed this as, okay, this is my coherent theory. This is my anchor that I can build exercises around. But now the way the research is suggesting, well, that's not really that important. So that was definitely a bandwagon I jumped on, because it solved the problem that I had, but it wasn't the right solution. It wasn't a solution at all. But sometimes when you have a problem and you don't have a solution, you'll grasp, your threshold for acceptance
Yeah.
drops.
Yeah.
So there,
Yeah. That was a good
one for sure.
That was a good one. And I think a lot of people are still going through that one too. I think I see that a lot too. And I think it's good, because I think for you to truly understand what it is that is needed, sometimes you have to take the wrong answer. You're not going to learn. For some people, it won't be learned any other way.
And it's interesting, because what I believed then and what I believe now are both evidence-led.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the evidence has changed, and the amount of evidence one way or the other has changed.
Yeah.
So then, okay, was it a mistake? Maybe it was the right thing to do if that's where the evidence was suggesting.
Yeah.
but it turned out to be incorrect. And I think this is really common in our world, like in the sports science world and conditioning world. We do a lot of small experiments. You know, the N is small, the number of participants is small, but yet we take them as gospel.
Yeah.
You know, don't get me started on polarization now because I know we're finishing up. But you know, you take these isolated observations and you build a grand theory out of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but even in medicine, where they, you know, weapon of choice is the randomized controlled trial, and there'll be huge randomized controlled trials.
Mm-hmm.
But the number of medical reversals over the past 20 years, and when I say reversal, I mean this was an established scientific fact a few years ago, and now it's just been reversed.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yes.
So I guess the key thing is for me, you develop beliefs, and then you go and maybe you talk about those beliefs, and then you feel that those beliefs are somehow part of me, and you're slow to relinquish them, and you're slow to break them. And I guess to me, the kind of work on is, you know, just to be sure that I am disloyal to my beliefs, I'm unfaithful to my beliefs. If I find evidence that is, that was disproving, I don't hang on to my beliefs for the sake of it.
That was a really good add-on to that, because I think if people read on medical reversals, there's a really good author out there. I suggest people go out and check out some of his books. Vinay Prasad. He's wrote a lot on medical reversals and also medical policy. And I think when people realize the reality of, you know, some of the states that medicine is in first world countries like Canada and the US, and some of the decisions they make off of what is the current evidence, it's quite shocking. I think people would come to believe. I've seen it. Well, I mean, I've seen it today. I had a surgeon suggest to me that, you know, non-surgical treatment would be a good option. And, you know, when I explained to him the current evidence out there for the last 10 years and the position that I'm in of, you know, the activity that I'm led, or the activities that I do, it's, you know, it's hard to kind of fight back against that, because for so long they've been in this industry and seen it, you know, review after review. But when it suddenly changes within a few years, it's really hard to, you know, accept that things have kind of moved on, and, you know, technology's in a different place. You know, procedures are in a different place, and it's hard to kind of let go of those years of coming in and having the same conversation 50 times, or, you know what I mean, thousands of times over with the patients. Suddenly it, you know, it's just hard for people to let go. But that was good. I really, really enjoyed hearing that, you know, that whole process for you. So another quick one is just, I'm always interested to hear people's interests or passions or expertise outside of sports science. Like, what do you do to, you know, get away from this and kind of drive some of your energy outside of this? Do you have?
Yeah, okay, well, I have 2 young kids at the moment, so
Yeah.
that time isn't great. That free
Yeah,
time isn't
no,
great. But yeah, so I train myself, so I do some exercise, whatever
yeah,
that is, but that will take up some time. Like to get into the outdoors, like to get into the mountains when I can, like to get up in the rock. You know, you
yeah,
mentioned bouldering and stuff, although it's been a
nice.
while now since I have been, but myself and my other half, certainly love all that type of stuff. So yeah, I guess the only other thing would be I you know I'm, I read quite a bit for leisure,
Yeah,
and I guess the past few years, unexpectedly, if I have some free time, I'll probably sit down and open an empty page and write something.
nice.
Could be about anything, but yeah, I found that really useful, especially if I'm in a short piece of time. I'll read something, I'll write something. I'll go out at the chin bar, hanging off the bathroom door upstairs at the shed outside with a squat rack, and so I'll try and do something. It's a little micro dose, but it's something.
That's nice. Yeah, that's those things are fairly therapeutic and useful, and they provide a lot of I think a lot of unknown benefits, but also a lot of unexpected benefits and opportunities when you start to apply yourself to those things outside of the whole
Yeah, and
training world.
it creates the illusion that I'm still in shape. That's really what it's about.
That's a good thing, right? Sometimes. So where I know people can find you on Twitter, right? At Simply Sports Eye. Is that it?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And check out John, if you just go look into whatever platform you want to, but search John Kiely's name up, and his papers are out there, whether it's on periodization, coordination. He has tons of great stuff that is very thought-provoking and very useful to try and wrap your head around. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today, and I hope you guys enjoy this conversation, folks. We'll catch you later.